everyone. Today we are going to be talking about wrap and turn short rows. Short rows are used to add extra fabric to your project or to add shaping to your project. And the most common method for those short rows is called wrap and turn. So that's what I'm going to be demonstrating today. Now you will commonly see this abbreviated in knitting patterns as W ampersand T, which is of course short for wrap and turn. And so the first part, the wrapping and the turning, is a pretty easy part. So I'm just going to work a little bit into the fabric. And what wrap and turn means is essentially that you are going to wrap the working yarn around a stitch and turn your knitting and work back in the opposite direction. All right, so let's say this is the point at which I want to work the wrap and turn on the right side or front side of my stockinette in this case. In order to wrap a knit stitch, what I'm going to do is bring my yarn forward to the front of my right needle. I'm going to slip that next stitch purlwise from left to right. Then I'm going to move my yarn to the back and slip that stitch back to my left needle and turn my work. All right, so now you can see that my working yarn is in front of that stitch, and when I move it to knit with it, it's going to put a little wrap around the base of that stitch. This is to help prevent holes from appearing in your fabric when you turn back and work in the other direction without reaching the end of your row. So you'll see when I go to work the next purl stitch, there's a little gap there. And this is the stitch that is wrapped. Let's see if we can get that to focus in. So now I'm going to work back a little bit, and I'm going to show you how to do it on the purl side. And then we're going to talk about what we do about those little gaps that appear. So you can see this is adding extra length to my fabric here without adding it here. You will see the short rows used to shape shoulders in sweaters, to add bust shaping in some sweaters, and on sock heels to create a curved fabric to fit around your heel. All right, so I'm going to work back a little bit on the wrong side, and then I'm going to go ahead and wrap a purl stitch. I'm going to leave my yarn where it is this time, slip that first stitch purlwise from the left to the right needle, move my yarn to the back, slip that stitch back to the left needle, and turn my work. All right, so again, you can see now that my working yarn is wrapped behind that stitch, and then when I move it to the front, it's going to be wrapped all the way around the base of that stitch. So I'm going to start working back in the other direction. And this is really what is a trickier part about working wrap and turn short rows. Not the wrapping and turning, which is relatively easy, but on the next encounter with a wrapped stitch, if you're working in stockinette, you need to work that little wrap together with the stitch, and you want to do it neatly so that your short rows kind of disappear into your fabric. It's never going to be 100% perfect, to be honest, especially because you know what you're looking for, but we want to make it as invisible as possible. So here we've reached our wrapped stitch. You can see this fabric, this yarn wrapped around the base of that stitch. And so now what we want to do is to work the wrap together with the stitch to help eliminate a hole in our fabric. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert my right needle into that stitch, or into that wrap, excuse me, from below. Then I'm going to twist it back and insert it into the stitch itself. And then I'm going to knit them together. I'm going to make sure that both the wrap and the stitch have the working yarn going through them. Okay? I'm going to work a little bit further. For the purposes of our demonstration. Over here is where that wrapped stitch was. There's no big gap there, so that's important. You can see that the stitch looks a little twisted. That's going to even out some with blocking, but as I said, it's not going to be 100% invisible, especially because as the person knitting the garment, you know what it looks like. All right, so now I'm going to demonstrate wrapping a stitch again on the knit side. Yarn forward, slip one stitch, yarn back, slip the stitch back to the left needle, and turn the work. And now I'm going to work back to that stitch we wrapped on the purl side and show you how to pick that wrap up and work it with its stitch. Okay, so here is the wrap we just picked up and knit together with its stitch. So you can see it looks relatively invisible here on the wrong side as well. Let's work back to our wrapped purl stitch way back here. If you are working in garter stitch, you don't need to pick up the wraps. That is a bumpy enough fabric that it is not essential that you do it. But on stockinette, you should. Okay, we've come back to our wrapped purl stitch. This one is the trickier one in my experience. So you can see the wrap, the yarn wrapped around the base of this stitch. And what we want to do is to insert the right needle into that wrap from the back, from below. So not here in the front and not from above, but here in the back from below. Then we want to, like a normal purl stitch, insert the right needle into our main stitch and purl the wrap and the stitch together. You want to make sure again that you get both. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and purl to the end, and we'll turn our work and see how it looks on this side. Okay, can you spot it? It is relatively invisible. So let's work back again to the knit stitch that I wrapped, and on the way we'll pass the wrapped stitch that we just fixed, and you'll see it a little more closely. All right, here is the stitch that we just did. You can see there's a little extra bump of yarn on the back side. There are 2 strands here instead of 1. But once we knit past it, you can see again that it's blending in pretty seamlessly with the fabric. I'm going to show you one more time, picking up the wrap on the front side with the knit stitch. Okay, here we are at our wrapped stitch. Again, you can see the yarn here wrapping around the base of the stitch. We're going to insert the right needle from below into the wrap, then into the stitch, and work them together, making sure we get our working yarn through both the stitch and the wrap. All right, and now one more time, I'm going to show you the picking up the wrap on the wrong side for a purl stitch. All right, so here's the point where we want to wrap the stitch, keep my yarn in front, slip the stitch from left to right, move my yarn in back, slip that stitch back to the left needle, and turn. Then I'm going to continue this row. Okay, back to that last stitch I wrapped for expedience sake. Turn there. Wrap one more stitch. And you can see as you get some practice, it moves pretty smoothly. It doesn't slow your knitting down too much. Okay, now we're back at our wrapped stitch. See if we can get a close-up view here. You can see this yarn wrapped around the base of the stitch. So again, I'm going to insert my right needle not into the front, which is here, but into the back from below of the wrap. Then I'm going to reorient the needle and insert it into the next stitch and purl the wrap together with the stitch. Okay. And we'll keep going. Here's the stitch that we just wrapped. You can see the two strands here, one from the stitch and one from the wrap that we picked up. We'll knit past it. And again, you can see that it blends pretty well right into the fabric. Okay, now down here is another stitch that we wrapped earlier. And you can see it looks a little twisted, and that will even out a bit with blocking. But they will never be perfectly invisible to you because you know they're there. However, wrap and turn short rows are a great way to add shaping to your garments and of course to create the heels for your socks. Okay, I've knit to the end of the row and just wanted to give you a final peek at the fabric. You can see first of all that what we've done is created additional rows here that are not down here at this end. So this is something you might do if you want to slope the shoulders of a sweater. Now you could also use a staggered bind off. This is just a little bit neater, tidier. And you can see our fabric. Again, this is not blocked, but for the casual observer, you're going to see nothing amiss in this fabric. It looks like standard stockinette. Now I can point out where the wraps were worked, here, here, over here. This is where I just turned it without wrapping anything. But for a casual observer of your knitting, they're not going to notice anything. And blocking is going to get these stitches to just straighten out a little bit. However, if you are looking for a short row method that is a little bit more invisible, I'm going to suggest you look into German short rows. and I'll be sharing a tutorial for that next week.